If I had a nickel for every time the second DLC of a Kingdom Rush game changed the quality of the whole game, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's great that it happened twice. That's right, the new Alliance DLC officially has my stamp of approval. Grumpy old Voduke, who was always ranting and raving about Alliance not having the encyclopedia, or not being strategic enough, or for having weird balance, is actually happy with what Alliance has done here. The senile old man finally got his medication, and now everything is sunshine and roses. No, I'm not being paid to say all this. In fact, I'm pretty sure that bridge is already burned after all my other videos about Ironhide's games. I always have, and always will, give my honest, real opinion on things, even if it's risky. So I hope it means all the more when I say that this DLC is genuinely good. To give the quick and dirty explanation, I beta tested the DLC all the way to completion. While the beta is not in its final state yet, if the current state is already good, then the public release will be even better. I need to clarify right now that this DLC is not going to sway most of the people who are already in the camp that don't like Alliance. This DLC is more content. So if you already don't like the game fundamentally, this isn't going to fix it. However, if you're someone like me who's always rooting for the game to reach its maximum potential, this is what I meant by the DLC changing the whole game. Alliance as a whole package feels like an overall stronger game by having this content in it. Anyone who already likes the game is almost definitely going to like this. So, why is this DLC actually good? First, let me remind everyone that I believe Kingdom Rush has an inherently fun gameplay loop, so most of the enjoyment is best described by what the game is not and does not do, with reference to things that get in the way of that gameplay loop. For example, starving the player of gold so that they can't enjoy the dopamine rush of buying more towers and upgrades, making the mechanics too luck dependent so that you don't feel like you're strategizing, giving heroes too much of a role that towers don't matter for the first half of the level. I'm happy to say that the new DLC has more gold throughout its levels than usual for Alliance, and it keeps RNG to a minimum. In other words, it gives the new content room to breathe and be thoroughly enjoyed by the player. And on that topic, there is a lot of new content in this expansion. Peak Kings set the bar high by introducing whole campaigns worth of enemies for only some of the levels, and this in turn made the update feel extremely high quality compared to other mini-campaigns. It challenged the player to overcome the challenges that these enemies brought in all sorts of crazy combinations. I can confidently say that this DLC rivals Peak Kings in the sheer variety of enemies. In fact, I'd argue that these enemies are even more meaningful. Without going into too much detail because I think Ironhide will send the Uruguayan cartel after me, these enemies by default have abilities that make you really consider how you want to employ your gold, heroes, and spells. But even more importantly, the wave compositions actually combine these enemies in ways that challenge the player to distribute their defensive options efficiently. What I mean by this is that you only have so much firepower from your heroes, so much from towers, and so much from spells. So you need to decide which of those elements is going to counter which enemy combinations and to what extent. Only when the levels are genuinely difficult does that end up mattering, and that's the case on impossible difficulty. Though if you're insane, you can still try to do self-imposed challenges. What makes these enemies stand out is that they actually deal a ton of damage for once. It didn't dawn on me until I compared the numbers, but Alliance is probably the least anti-units game in the series. Unless you count flying enemies as anti-units, that changes things. But what I mean is not counting barracks, but rather killing units. You don't really need to invest a lot in upgrading barracks in Alliance, because the extra stalling power doesn't really go anywhere. But here, because enemy damage is higher, it feels more like the old days. The game also does more of what I adored about the campaign. It brings in Chaos Mode-esque enemies. I thought Vile spawners were reminiscent of Chaos Mode's emphasis on stalling threatening enemies to effectively silence them. One of the most infamous Chaos Mode enemies were Jungle Matriarchs, who would not spawn hatchlings but rather whole matriarchs themselves. The new DLC introduces an enemy who feels like they should spawn a weaker enemy and have been buffed by KM5 to spawn a stronger one. But instead of being modded, this is actually the real enemy already. And it's about time too. KM5 has been carrying Kingdom Rush content throughout all of 2024 pretty much. Furthermore, the boss department delivered hard here. I can confidently say that, excluding the Legends bosses, the new DLC introduced what is now my favorite fight in a Kingdom Rush game. It really speaks to my inner nerd by including a mechanic that organically encourages the player to make and commit to a big choice in the boss fight, giving them multiple ways to solve the problem, but demanding that they play to the strengths of the option they take. It's hard to describe without going into spoilers, so let's use the best of the previous Kingdom Rush bosses as examples. The reason why Morganok is the best boss Ironhide has ever done in my opinion is because you can choose which one of the 3 to kill first, and then your choice will buff the remaining bosses and their support enemies. For example, if you don't want to deal with a summoner, you can choose to kill more first, but be prepared to deal with Gaw and Nock becoming stronger. That sort of give and take is exactly what makes every run of the boss interesting each time, no matter how many times I play it. Likewise, it's how you choose to invest your damage in this new boss fight that will differentiate the experience each time you play it. You can either take it slow and steady because that feels safer, or if you think that a longer fight gives more room for error to occur, you can try to burst down the boss. Going that route necessitates precise execution. I think that difference is great, making this level the new best level in all of Alliance for me. It's really nice to have Saitama return as a hero in Alliance. In this game, he has a huge bonk that really defines how I execute his playstyle. My preferred way to use him is similar to how I use Brave Bark. I save his big bonk for the chonkiest, thickest, juiciest target. Then, when I know this skill is on cooldown so it can't be wasted, I use the rest of his skills. You can see in the trailers that he has a variety of summons, which can stall for him while waiting for the big bonk to come back. But the big bonk is just one dimension of this playstyle of going in and then escaping from melee combat. Saitama has quintessential glass cannon stats. He deals the highest melee damage per second of any hero in the game by far, and it's all true damage. But he also runs out of health fast, so the best thing to do is to get value out of his melee damage and retreat him once he gets to around half health. Then while he's not in combat, all of his non-bonk abilities can be used to keep enemies stalled. If you can correctly time the cooldowns of his abilities, then you can perfectly stall all enemies by blocking them with the skills when he's retreated and blocking with Saitama while the abilities are charging. He's no Durax, but the ceiling for him is very high nonetheless. As for the tower, this feels like a hero transformed into a tower. You get 3 upgradable abilities, a first for Alliance. These all serve the role of damaging and stalling, pretty classic for a barracks. But their stalling potential comes from attributes that haven't been revealed yet, so I don't want to say too much about them. However, I do want to state that this tower effectively robs the Paladins and Demon Pits of their roles. So if you thought the Paladins and Demon Pits were underpowered, but still wanted to work them into your strategy, this is the tower to replace them with. Sorry to anybody that prefers those towers aesthetically. I'm sure some people are going to bully me for being positive, but let's be honest, Alliance is the most overhated game in the series. I think this is due to Alliance being such an interesting case of a game doing a lot of things right, but still not resonating with people. It makes people like the Holland and me want to analyze it under a microscope to figure out what the exact missing piece is or the wrong direction the game went in. Therefore, we're thinking more about what's negative with the game when in reality it's fine. Sure, it could be better, anything could, and in the video game industry, where there are such amazing options as competition, it does make it more significant to not be a 10 out of 10 game on the market. But at the end of the day, I have a lot more positive than negative things to say. The key to having fun with Alliance is not about solving a level by picking the best specific tower to do the job. It's about picking the towers you think are the most fun and figuring out how to make them work. In the past, I would jokingly refer to this as forcing a strategy, which is something I would do in all of the games of my own volition. Now we have a game that's built around that. The puzzle that you solve is what specific micro you need to do to fill in the weaknesses of the towers you just built. That's how the game maintains difficulty on a fundamental level, because the towers themselves just aren't strong enough to do the job without help. That isn't to say that some towers are all equal. There are going to be easier ones to work with and counter the more significant parts of the level to a greater extent. So the differences between towers will still lead to a different experience, but fundamentally, you can still boil it down to what I just said. Ironically, I would liken this to playing the irons of the old games that were widely perceived to be the hardest, like Knife and Sword Iron. Because you have such limited gold in Alliance for the most part, you work with as few tower options as an Iron Challenge gives you, forcing spell timing and hero micro to do the heavy lifting. I think that the known general dissatisfaction with the heroic and iron challenges as of late in the community might explain why Alliance as a whole has had a similar reception from the community. So what has changed about the things I've said about Alliance in the past? Well, I do still think my points mostly still stand about how to optimize the game. Obviously, an encyclopedia is better to have than to not have. I still think that the gold stars and the non-DLC parts of the game are a drop off in the fun factor compared to the older games, but I don't feel as tired playing the games as I used to. This is because I've accepted the game design for what it is and learned to have fun by using the towers I just happen to feel like using. I also don't stand by what I said at the end of my A video, where I said that the game was targeted to people who were content with slop. That was overly harsh and said in the heat of the moment, because that was the first time that I ever tried not scripting my entire video, and that was the only unscripted part. I got really burned out from this series because of the crushing difficulty of the mods I was playing while also streaming them, which in turn bled into my enjoyment of the main games. Now that I've relaxed more, I can enjoy this stuff for what it is, and also enjoy the Kingdom Rush mods for what they are too. Last thing I want to say is that this DLC has the potential to flop hard because of the incoming release of the Hollow Knight Silksong game. I wouldn't be surprised if Ironhide poured their heart into this DLC, then got worse sales due to external factors such as the most anticipated video game of all time releasing, and then falsely concluding that their effort has no impact on the sales of their DLC. Then, I would have 2 nickels for every time Ironhide reacted wrongly to perceived failures about an Alliance DLC, which isn't a lot, but it would be weird if it happened twice. Let's hope that doesn't happen. What's hippity hoppin', unknown caller? What do you mean the new hero isn't Saitom? Saitom was literally Ironhide's take on Sun Wukong. Free Saitom!